Blockchain is immutable and cannot be altered.
Peer-to-peer technology that groups data into blocks and then chains those blocks together with cryptographic mathematical algorithms that produces an immutable chain of reaction. Vocabulary refresher, immutable, unchanging over time, unable to be changed, fixed, set, rigid, inflexible, permanent, established, carved in stone. That's what we want records to be.
One of the defining characteristics of blockchain is its supposed high security, its immutability, the claim that what's on blockchain is written in stone and cannot be altered. Is this really the case? Depending upon how narrow a context you choose to cherry pick, you could say it's immutable, but there are situations where if you zoom out, it is definitely not immutable. For example, let's examine the Bitcoin blockchain. Just that statement in itself is confusing. Why is that? Because the Bitcoin blockchain is not really one single immutable blockchain. There are dozens of different variations of the Bitcoin blockchain. There's BTC, the most popular version, but there's also BCH, Bitcoin Cash, and BSV, Bitcoin Satoshi's Vision, and various others. These were all originally part of a single base blockchain up to a certain point, when changes were made to the code which caused the blockchain to fork into separate versions. Anybody who owns Bitcoin Cash, if they owned it before the fork, also has coins on the original BTC blockchain. Instead of one immutable version of blockchain, now there are several different versions, and in fact, multiple copies of the actual Bitcoin tokens that can be owned by different people. So when people say, there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever made, that's not technically true, because every time blockchain forks into a different version, that's another 21 million Bitcoin that can be owned by different people. This also involves a fallacy called no true Scotsman, where you have people arguing over which version of Bitcoin is the real Bitcoin. But ask yourself this, if blockchain were truly immutable, then shouldn't it be prohibited from forking into separate versions? Beyond the forking debate, are there other instances where blockchain can be altered? Yes.
51% attacks.
Technically speaking, anytime a majority of the blockchain operators want to do something, they can exert unilateral control over the blockchain. When it comes to decentralized consensus mechanisms, basically the majority wins. And if one or two mining operators control more than 50% of the hash power of the blockchain, then they, in fact, can do what they want, including rejecting transactions, reversing transactions, moving tokens around, and forging their own version of the blockchain and forcing everybody else to accept it. It's often called a 51% attack, but the pejorative attack is technically a misnomer, because in the decentralized world of blockchain, there is not supposed to be any central authority that can determine what is right and wrong, other than code. If the code allows it to happen, then it's, quote, legal. It's not an attack, it's consensus. This has already happened with many blockchain projects. In 2020, so-called privacy-centric, censorship-resistant blockchain Grin networks suffered an attack that shut down the network for a while. Grin was touted as Bitcoin 2.0 and had more than $100 million in seed money invested. Today, a Grin token is worth about 7 cents, significantly less than its original $10 opening price. Bitcoin Gold suffered not one, but two 51% attacks, one in 2018 and one in 2020. Ethereum Classic suffered three 51% attacks in 2020 alone. Note that in some cases, you don't even need 51% control to alter the blockchain. Some blockchains like IOTA can be attacked with 34% control due to differences in their consensus mechanism. Some will argue this is only really a problem with small crypto operations, and the larger a blockchain project becomes, the harder it is to undermine. Now that may be true, but the key phrase is harder, aka more expensive, but certainly still possible. The higher the price of crypto, the more incentive there is to manipulate the ledger and the network. And another side effect of mining consortiums and large-scale cloud providers is that it's now possible for people to rent computing resources so they can scale up enough hash power to have influence over the network if they desire. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't. Here's a good example. Look at Monero, the crypto that obscures the source of transactions, a token whose prime use now centers around money laundering, illegal drug sales, and other criminal activities. Monero is a proof-of-work token whose blockchain operations could be sabotaged easily by various law enforcement agencies who could take over a large enough portion of the network to render it unusable. There's certainly motivation for law enforcement to do this if other more direct methods fail. And in this case, the lack of economic viability is offset by the social good authorities would do by stopping illegal money laundering and other criminal activity. And this would be completely legal and within the bounds of how crypto works. Crypto developers assume if it's not financially beneficial, nobody will sabotage their network, but they don't take into account other incentives that have nothing to do with profit.
Other ways to hack the blockchain.
As cryptocurrencies evolve and add more features, they also add more weaknesses to the blockchain. Every time you add a different way to put data on chain, you create a new vector for attack. And one of the best and most prolific examples of ongoing blockchain hacking is on Ethereum and other blockchains that have a feature called smart contracts. These contracts have the power to write to the blockchain. Therefore, if they are infiltrated and manipulated, they can put data on the blockchain that is different from what they were supposed to do. Each and every day, rogue smart contracts steal people's crypto and crypto-related assets like NFTs. If blockchain is immutable, but smart contracts can be exploited, what's the difference? The end result is still the same. People get their stuff stolen. We could devote several hours to all the different ways smart contracts have, quote, hacked the blockchain. But instead, let's showcase a specific historical smart contract hack that also resulted in another very direct example of a popular blockchain being directly muted, modified, and rolled back, in complete defiance of the principles of blockchain.
The infamous Ethereum DAO hack.
In 2016, the folks behind Ethereum created another crypto project called the DAO, D-A-O, the first decentralized autonomous organization. It was basically an investment pool of crypto that was managed via a token-based consensus system ruled by Ethereum smart contracts. It was funded with $150 million in value initially, a large portion of the available crypto that was in the ETH ecosystem. People could stake their ETH for DAO tokens to participate in the organization. Smart contracts managed the token allocation. A vulnerability was soon discovered in the DAO contract code. Before the bug could be patched, some people managed to exploit it and siphon millions of dollars of tokens from the DAO account. When a bug fix was proposed, another vulnerability was found in the code patch, which prompted the Ethereum principals to propose a hard fork and just roll the blockchain back to before the hack altogether. There was much argument over this, but a lot of money and trust was on the line. This produced a schism with two separate versions of Ethereum, the rolled back version called just Ethereum, and the original version of the blockchain called Ethereum Classic. At best, the blockchain was edited and rolled back as a result of, quote, consensus, while others may say it was coerced by the development team, threatening to not support the original version of the blockchain and leave miners out in the cold if they didn't comply. The end result was still the same. The immutable blockchain was modified. So to summarize, is blockchain immutable? Well, again, depends on who you ask. Yes and no. One can answer yes to that in the same way someone can argue, is Kraft macaroni and cheese homemade, by saying, hey, I made it at home, therefore it's homemade. There's a notable disconnect between the traditional definition of homemade and what someone is claiming in that argument. Likewise, there's a similar disconnect when debating whether blockchain is immutable. It is only if you very narrowly define what immutability means and ignore the many examples of how it can and has been changed. But in a larger sense, is immutability even a noteworthy feature? As we've seen, there's plenty of scenarios where the blockchain ledger can be modified, should be modified, and has been modified, especially in the case of system improvements, hacks, and thefts.